The Baltimore Ravens stand at 10-5 after a convincing defeat over their division rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers, merely 3 days ago, with a final score of 34-17. Tomorrow, on Christmas Day, they will travel to Houston to take on the AFC South Division leader, the 9-6 Texans. On the same day the Ravens defeated the Steelers, the Texans were handed their sixth loss to them by the Kansas City Chiefs, who are now 14-1, and will take on the same Steelers team the Ravens just faced, also on Christmas Day, just a few hours before the Ravens play. Both the Ravens and Texans have seen their fair share of struggles this season and are no stranger to adversity from both external sources as well as internal pressures. Lamar Jackson is having his best season yet, but no one expects more from him than Lamar himself, rarely able to truly enjoy a victory or accomplishment before turning on the tablet to look at footage and see where he can further improve. CJ Stroud is having a very real case of sophomore slump after lighting the league on fire just last year, and while adding weapons in the offseason such as Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, and Danielle Hunter have given the Texans lineup a roster to drool over, it hasn't all gone according to plan in 2024. But looking purely at their records after what both of these teams did last year, many would say that they have underachieved. But we also know as fans that the numbers only tell half the story, and with everything these two teams have gone through this season, it's anyone's guess how this Christmas game will end. Let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report, and we are at Week 17 of the 2024 season, so hit that like button if you enjoy this video, subscribe and turn notifications on if you're new so you don't miss an upload, and comment down below how you think these teams will do on the shortest week off in NFL history. As we know, the Ravens roster is filled with players that are relied on week in and week out to produce at a high level, making big plays both on offense and defense. Players like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Kyle Hamilton, and Marlon Humphrey are just a few of those playmakers called upon to be difference makers in almost every game. But the Ravens have also shown confidence and trust in other starting positions and their depth pieces, a trust that has been well earned through producing when their number was called. I wanted to go through some of those players that I believe could have a serious impact in the upcoming game, even if it's just a play or two where they show up big for the team. Starting off with the offensive players, we're going to get right to the line and mention two starters who have been the most inconsistent this season, the left guard Patrick Mekari and right guard Daniel Faalele. When these two aren't heavily penalized and stay technically sound with their blocks in both the run game and pocket protection, the offensive line is surprisingly very good. However, against good defensive lines and explosive pass rushers, we have seen the guard play be the Achilles heel of this Ravens offense. We saw probably the best performance out of these two against the Steelers, but with Faalele getting banged up and on short rest, they could be facing an uphill battle on Wednesday. Moving on to another offensive group, and one that will be purely focused on the backup position, running back. With Justice Hill getting knocked out of the game and entering concussion protocol against the Steelers, the Ravens will be looking to have both Rasheen Ali and Keaton Mitchell ready to go against the Texans. The question is, who will be first called in to relieve Henry? The obvious answer to most Ravens fans would of course be Keaton Mitchell, given what we saw him do last year with just a small sample size. And while I certainly believe Keaton Mitchell is the more talented and explosive between these two, it has to be considered that Ali has been given more opportunities so far this season. I'm not sure how much that plays into the coach's decision on who to play and who plays more, but if I had my choice, the thought of having Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell available would be too tantalizing to pass up. For all we know, this pairing of Henry and Mitchell could look like a similar duo in production to Detroit's backfield of Montgomery and Gibbs. Either way, it's nice to know that the Ravens have capable players to go to, and they don't have to rush Hill back, who has proven to be a most reliable commodity for this team, and they will want to have as healthy as possible for the postseason. The next position group is one that has been surprisingly healthy all season, but has recently become a bit more vulnerable over the last few weeks: wide receiver. Zay popped up on the injury report with a shoulder injury. We've seen Bateman in a walking boot last week, and Aguilar might not play for the second straight game. Even if all three play, which I hope they do, I still think we see a larger snap count for either Tylan Wallace or Devontae Walker. Although the Ravens didn't target any wide receivers besides Flowers and Bateman against the Steelers, we have already seen that both Wallace and Walker can have huge impacts with very few opportunities. Moving over to the defensive side of things, I'm not necessarily looking for depth players to step up, but it seems like each week the Ravens defense relies on all of its big plays coming from Humphrey, Kyle Van Noy, or Hamilton. On the defensive line, I'd like to see either Travis Jones or Nnamdi Madubuike get their name called out for either getting pressure up the middle on the quarterback or getting a few tackles for loss. And speaking of pressure, I want Odafe Owe to finish the job in this game by not just pressuring CJ Stroud, but getting him down to the turf. I also want to see Tavius Robinson a bit more, who has shown significant growth in year 2, but has also been inconsistent, going a few games between impressive performances. And this game feels like a good opportunity for him to make a splash again. The last player on defense I want to have at least a solid game is Brandon Stephens, because as great as last year was, and surprising as well, 2024 has been the opposite and overall underwhelming to say the least. It has unfortunately become one of the most predictable play calls against our defense, where if the opposing offense is in the red zone, they'll just throw towards the left corner to whoever Stephens is covering, and 9 times out of 10, the result will either be a touchdown or a pass interference call. I'd like this game against the Texans to be different, but that's going to be a challenge if he's covering Nico Collins on the same type of play, so be prepared for either of those two outcomes I mentioned. As far as this Houston Texans team goes, there are 4 players on offense and 6 players on defense that I think the Ravens coaching staff and players will be keeping an eye on whenever they're on the field. And just as a heads up, CJ Stroud is not one of them, as the Ravens defense will of course be keeping their eyes on the opposing starting quarterback, so I didn't really feel like I needed to mention him. Starting out for the Texans offense, the Ravens will be looking out for a familiar target in running back Joe Mixon. Mixon started off the year incredibly strong, having 5 of his first 6 games clearing 100 yards on the ground, but only having 1 game over 100 yards over the last month. Despite the lack of production on the ground, though, Mixon continues to be a threat receiving as well, having nearly 300 yards on the season through the air. Next up, we have Nico Collins, the number 1 wide receiver for the Houston offense, and despite missing a significant chunk of the season due to injury, Collins has posted over 900 yards in just 10 games to go along with 6 touchdowns. And while the Texans have lost Stephon Diggs for the season, as well as losing Tank Dell just this past Saturday in their loss to the Chiefs, they should be getting back John Mechie for this matchup against the Ravens, who should at least give them a spark on the opposite side of Collins. The last member of the Texans offense that the Ravens will need to be on the lookout for is tight end Dalton Schultz, who has been a reliable security blanket for Stroud this season. With all the injuries this Texans team has had to deal with this year, Schultz has been one of the few constants for this offense, catching 48 passes for 482 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, the first 2 players on defense that the Ravens will have to be on the lookout for are both defensive ends Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. I spoke earlier about my concerns about this short week and the Ravens' inconsistent offensive line, and these 2 are why I'm concerned. Between the 2 of them, they have 22.5 sacks, 40 quarterback hits, as well as 31 tackles for loss and a couple of forced fumbles. The Ravens have put the ball on the ground a lot in the past couple of games compared to the middle part of the season, where it seemed as though they had cleaned up this issue for good. Everybody on the offensive line is going to have to make sure they follow their assignments and give Lamar a clean pocket to throw out of if they don't want this game to be a big letdown. The next player that's going to have an impact on this game, no matter what the Ravens do, is Texans linebacker Henry To'o, who not only leads the team in combined tackles with 97, but is a factor in every other aspect on defense, recording an interception, 3 pass deflections, a forced fumble, 1.5 sacks, and 7 tackles for loss. Like I said, this guy is going to be involved in the game no matter what, so get used to hearing his name. The last 3 players we're going to be talking about are the 3 extremely young and extremely gifted secondary players in this Texans defense: Derek Stingley Jr., Kamari Lassiter, and Kalen Bullock. So far, over the season, these 3 guys have combined for 13 interceptions, defended 38 passes, and combined for 150 tackles. Lamar is going to have a tough challenge throwing against this secondary with these 3 back there. None of them have a passer rating against them over 60, or a completion percentage against them above 50%. And with Stingley Jr. being the oldest in this group, turning 24 in June, this is a great secondary that will be a strength for this Texans defense for the foreseeable future. Let's just hope that Lamar and this Ravens offense can do what they need to do on Wednesday and come out with a win. Now, despite the injuries to this Houston Texans team, I believe this will be one of the more challenging games for the Ravens this season. The Texans defense is decent against the run and great against the pass. But having said that, their secondary is one glaring weakness, and that's allowing 28 passing touchdowns against them on the season, which is 30th. And the Ravens offense just so happens to have a new franchise leader in passing touchdowns under center. In my opinion, the strategy for this game is nearly identical to what the Ravens did against the Steelers. use their battering ram named Derrick Henry to bludgeon and exhaust this Texans defensive line, giving our offensive line the advantage and tiring out their dangerous pass rushers on the outside. Then, once you get them in the red zone, Lamar and his pass catchers take over and try to take advantage of the exhausted and worn down defense. My final score prediction for this game has the Ravens winning 30-24. If you guys enjoyed this Week 17 Christmas Day preview, go ahead and give the video a like. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you're new, and comment down below your thoughts on this AFC rematch from last year, as well as your own final score predictions. And as always, guys, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.